I want to show you a slide of presidential elections from 1932 through 2008. You'll see that there is not a very continuous, or there's not much conformity in the percent that votes. 1932, you'll see that about 52, 53% of the people voted. In 40, that went up to about 58. 48 drops back down to about 51. In 52, we hit a fairly decent high of 62%. That was our 1960. We see Kennedy versus Nixon, the highest turnout rate in the last half century, so at 63.1%. So the best we've ever had for a presidential election turnout is 63.1%. I want you to look at 1972. Well, we're going to talk about this in a minute. This is the first election after voting age was lowered from 21 to 18, and you can see how it plummeted. So I just wanted y'all to see this. Look at in 1996, Clinton versus Dole. Turnout drops below half. We actually were below 50%, so 49.1%. The two main reasons for the drop in voter turnout in the United States after the 1960s. The first was the 26th Amendment. This lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. This went into effect in 1972. Why would this reduce the number of voters? If you recall, or why would this lower the voting percent? If you recall the beginning of the last lecture, we were looking at demographics. And we stated that one of the demographics we need to consider for voting was age. And that the people who are older tend to participate more than younger people. So by lowering the voting age from 21 to 18, yes, we increased the number of people who could and who can participate. However, we didn't increase the number of people who do participate, who do choose to take advantage of this lower age limit. So we're increasing the number of people who are eligible to vote. They just don't do it. The second reason that we believe there's a lower voter turnout in the United States after the 1960s was we see a drop in identification with the two major political parties. This simply means people are no longer identifying as a Republican. People are no longer identifying as a Democrat. We see that 1/3 of all Americans now actually consider themselves independents. Because of this lack of association, they don't have a stake in the game, if you will. They don't care who wins. It's if we identify as a Republican, if we identify as a Democrat, this gives us a reason to go vote. We want to see our team win. We want to see our political party win. By identifying as an independent, we don't care. We have less reason to go vote. We're happy, or not happy, but we will settle for whichever party wins the election. Voter turnout around the world. Now remember, and if you look at the bottom, this is percent of voting age population. What's the issue here? Just because this is the voting age population, it does not mean that everybody in here is eligible to vote. But if we just look at the general numbers, if we were just looking at voting age population per country, United States, you see on average 56.9% of our people will turn out to vote in presidential elections. Well, compared to worldwide, we're kind of in the middle. I say that if you look at who's the highest. Italy, 92.5% of their voting age population will turn out to vote. Even Australia, Austria, Belgium, they're close to 85%. Denmark, close to 84%. Germany, 80%. Greece, 80%. Israel, 80%. Did I say Israel? I meant to say Italy the first time if I said Israel. I mean, if you look at who's lower than us, that's easier to do. Mexico, their voting age population, the voting turnout of their voting age population, 48.1%. Russia, 55%. Switzerland, 50%. Actually, we're a lot closer to the bottom than we are at the top. So if this was just an idea, this is just to let you know how we, the United States, compare in our voting habits and our voting tendencies with other major nations. These two tables, once again, we're going to 1960 to 2008, the top level, or the top table, excuse me. This is going to be presidential general elections. That's table 3.1. Table 3.2, percent of the voting age population casting ballots in non-presidential general elections. What we need to remember about these non-presidential, these are the elections in which we are electing our state leaders, our state executives. So while they don't have an impact on the national, they do have an impact on a bigger impact on our life because we're electing our state leaders. But let's look at the top table, 3.1, talk about president. 1960, United States, 62.8% of the voting age population cast ballots. In Texas, 41.8%. United States in 1964, they went down to 61.9%. We went up 44.4%. However, we are still 17.5% less than the general population. We ranked 48th among the 50 states. 1968, 60% for the U.S., 48.7%. If you look at these numbers, you see that people in the U.S. don't vote for presidents. The numbers are all over. We've had 60, 64, and 68. We're above 60%. And every year since then, we've been in the 50%. Every election, since then, we've been in the 50%. With the exception being 1996, we were at 49%. In Texas, we are consistent. We are consistently in the 40 percentile, 40 to 49 percentile. And to make matters worse, we rank among the 50 states. We are consistent. The best we ever are 43rd out of 50. This means we have a number of Texans of voting age population who are not voting. Now, whether this is because they can't, or they're just not doing it. Remember, those are two different things, but our numbers don't show well. So let's go down to table 3.2. Percent of the voting age population casting ballots in non-presidential general elections. So what's commonly called the midterms. Midterms are the elections between the presidential elections. And like I said a minute ago, this is where we cast votes for our leaders, for our state leaders. Remember, the United States is still voting because we are voting for U.S. representatives. We're voting for certain senators, a third of the senators every year. Now, these aren't as important, these aren't as glamorous because we're not voting for president. So if you notice, at the U.S. level, in the non-presidential year, look at the numbers. Big gap, and they go down very, very much. We're down in the mid-40s, and we drop down to the 30s, low 30s, in the percent of people that are actually participating in the midterm elections. Once you get past 1970, so 74 on, we don't get above 40%. In Texas, now 1998 is a typo when they did the slide. That should be 26.1. But still, in Texas, we are consistently voting in the 20 percentile. We have an exception. 1974, we're 18.4%. 1994, we're 31%. But Texas, we are consistently voting under 30% in non-presidential elections. So Texans, we don't vote. Once again, if you look at the rank of Texas among the 50 states there, our best year was 1990 when we finished 42nd out of 50. So we don't vote. We need to fix this issue. We see a number of reasons for low voter turnout in Texas, and we're talking historical limitations. So this is what has happened since the late 1800s, early 1900s. We saw a poll tax introduced. Why did we see a poll tax? Remember, the Democrats, the Caucasians, did not want African Americans to vote. It was forced upon us by the Northerners, by the radical Republicans in the Reconstruction Acts. So we charged the poll tax, and it might have been something like a quarter to vote. But when you're a farmer and you're only making $2 a week, can you really afford that? The poll tax limited a number of people. Women's suffrage. While we had women in Texas, remember, ladies, y'all weren't allowed to vote till the 19th Amendment, till 1920 or so. And still then, traditionally, women didn't vote much. So this is one of the other issues. We had what was called the white primary. We talked about this early on. This is where the state had the Democratic Party run the Democratic primary. Why did they do this? Because the Democratic Party was a private organization, so they were free to discriminate. This wasn't changed until the 1940s. What was that court case? We've talked about this. The military vote's an issue. What I mean by this is Texas is the second largest state, the second most populous state. We send a number of people into the military. We send them all over the world. And you're allowed to vote when you're in the military, but you have to request an absentee ballot. A number of military people, for whatever reason, won't do that. They won't participate in voting in elections. So that's one of the issues we have. I was only supposed to hit it once. The long residence requirement. To become a resident in the state of Texas, you actually have to reside in the state of Texas for 1 year. So you have to move, stay here a year, then you are legally a resident, then you can register to vote. It used to be you had to own property to be allowed to vote. A number of people could not do that. We used to have annual registration. You had to register every year to vote. Or the early registration. You have to be registered within 30 days. Sometimes this could provide an obstacle. There we go. An obstacle to people wanting to vote. Continued. The socioeconomic factors. Education, race or ethnicity, money, economic factors. These are all things that play a factor in Texas. Historically, minorities don't vote as often. Poor people don't vote as often. Those who belong to the lower class don't vote as often. The ballot length. The ballot length can be discouraging because you never know imagine if you live in one of the bigger counties, Harris County, Dallas County, Barrett County for San Antonio. Imagine you live in one of these counties and it's time for you to come vote. I'm going to use Harris County because that's the one I'm most familiar with. Well, and remember, a lot of these times we're going to vote for federal, we're going to vote for state, we're going to vote for local, and we may have a number of state constitutional amendments or other type of minutia on there. So we could be requested to vote in 3 federal elections. So we have to pay attention. We hopefully learn about the people running at the federal level. This would be your president, your senator, and your House rep. If we're talking state level, if it's a midterm, well, we have 6 people that make up the office of Texas. We elect 5 of the 6. We're still going to vote at the U.S. level for the federal level for our House member. We may or may not be voting for our senator. We may have local elections going on where we might have to vote. Once again, Harris County, you have the mayor. So there's one position you have to vote on. We will have 14 members of the city council. 5 of these members are at large, so these are 5 more members that you have to pay attention to. You get to vote on these at large seats. Then you have 1 that actually represents your district. So there's another item or another candidate you have to learn about. If we're talking courts, in the civil courts alone, we have a total of, I want to say, 37 courts that we're electing half of them every 2 years. So you have to learn about 18 or 19 district judges, and that's just criminal. There's the family courts. There's the justice of the peace. There might be municipal courts. There's going to be there could be constitutional amendments, state constitutional amendments that we need to consider. Some of these ballots can reach 7 pages in length, and it can take a while. And if you want to do a good job, if you want to have political knowledge, you have to research all of these. A number of people don't want to put that much effort into it, so they don't. They just don't care. They just don't vote. Political culture, the set of political values and beliefs that are dominant in a society. Please remember, this is a reference to Texas being a traditionalistic, individualistic society. We don't like change. We like who our political leaders are. We're going to re-elect them for the most part. And this is just the way it's been for years. We spend a lot of time talking about who is eligible to vote, what the requirements are if you're eligible or not, the age, citizenship. If you're not eligible, mentally incompetent, if you're a felon, how to get your rights back, who votes, do we vote, or is our turnout high or low? Voter turnout is very low in the United States and also in Texas. But now let's actually get into the election process. There are a number of things to cover here. Our first thing is going to be something called a primary election. And this is simply the device, the election for selecting political party nominees. What occurs is that the person running, the people that are running, recall that numerous people want to run for this position. This is the weeding out process. This is going to get the person who's going to represent your party. Traditionally, we have seen different types. These have been caucuses where party leaders will meet and they will decide, they will cast their votes. The party convention system where delegates will decide, or direct where we vote on our person. So what happens is we're going to have a primary election. We will have usually have a number of people who will run for office. The primary occurs. We are trying to elect a person from there. So we may have 6 people who want to run for U.S. Senate as a Republican. Like I said, this is the weeding out process. In Texas, we vote for the person we want to represent our party. Please remember, it was finally in 1944, Smith versus Allwright, that case I asked about a minute ago, that primaries were recognized as an integral part of the election process. This is a court case that prevented the Democratic Party, or that stopped the Democratic Party from discriminating against African Americans. Primary elections continued. Who must hold a primary? This is simple. If your party received 20% of the gubernatorial vote, of the governor's vote in the last governor's election, your party must hold a primary. Easy to go. Well, what about these third parties that run for governor? They don't have to have a primary, so how do they get on the governor's ballot? A little bit harder, but still relatively easy to do. If you are a third party and you want to get on the ballot, your party must hold a convention. On top of that, you must provide a list of supporters. People must sign a list, say, place this person on the ballot. It must be, supporters must equal 1% of the total gubernatorial vote in the last election. I'm just pulling out a small number to make it easy. This means that if we had 250,000 votes in the last governor's election, you need 1%, so you need 2,500 votes. Now, this is where it gets a tad bit harder. I said it's easy, but this is a little bit harder. The signatures, your supporters, they must be registered voters who have not participated in any other primary. So while you may find this X number of votes, you may find people who want to support you. If they voted in the Democratic primary or if they voted in the Republican primary, they cannot sign your petition. They cannot support you. What happens is each page that is signed must be notarized, and they are saying they did not vote in a primary. These petitions are turned into the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State will actually look through the petitions, and they will go back and see if this person voted in one of the 2 primaries. If they voted in one of the 2 primaries, their signature is struck. They are kicked off your petition. So you have to be extremely careful. If you need, and once again, just a number, 2,500 signatures, and you turn in 2,502, you might want to get more, because chances are good somebody forgot they voted, somebody didn't understand, whatnot, and some of these signatures are going to get thrown off because they've already voted in a primary. You have to pay to be on a ballot. You have to pay to run for the primary. If you'll see here, I provided a list of fees. The most expensive one, take note, if you want to run for U.S. Senator, the most expensive one is U.S. Senator. You have to pay a $5,000 filing fee. Now, what I like to say here is some of these are supposed to separate. Have you heard the phrase, separate the contender from the pretender. That's what some of these are. If you want to run for U.S. Senator and you do not have the $5,000 filing fee, if you personally don't have it, or if you can't raise $5,000, you really don't need to be running for office. Because remember, what gets you elected? Money. So if you can't afford the filing fee, don't even bother. I've got a couple of different ballots to discuss. Well, I'll discuss later. I want to show you one now. This is called a block ballot, the official ballot, and what this ballot does, it is for one party. This case, it is for the Democratic Party, and it lists all of the people that are available. If you look in the top left, you see Senator and Congress, John Kerry and Jim Rappaport. So this is called a block ballot. Since 1971, I don't know where I came from 1991. Since 1971, primaries have been funded and paid by the state. Our elections are held in Texas on the second Tuesday of March. This day is commonly referred to as Super Tuesday, and the reason behind this is it has to do with presidential elections. A number of states hold elections on Super Tuesday. The idea is that the people running for president, this is the day, if they don't achieve enough delegates, they achieve a large number. This puts them very, very close to their nomination at the national level. This is the day that the most delegates are going to be available on any one day during the primary cycle. Turnout in primaries is much lower than in general elections. So elections in March are much lower than turnout is much lower in March than it is in November. And the reason for this is we have people out there, and I say they don't care, and what I mean by that is they don't care who the nominee is. They're going to go vote in November for the person that represents their party, that represents their ideology. They don't care who the individual is because they figure that, oh, they're a Republican. They're interchangeable. They all reflect my view. Or, oh, they're a Democrat. They're interchangeable. They all reflect my view. So they won't go vote in the primary, but they will go vote in the November election to make sure their party wins. In our primary elections, it must be won by a majority. So this means 50% plus 1. But what do we know about primary elections? What do we know when we have a number of people running? If we have 3, 4, 5, 6 people running, is it easy to achieve a majority vote? Not usually. And this is one of the problems with Texas, and well, nationwide, but with Texas in particular. Our election process is long. So we have our primary election in March. It must be won by a majority vote. If the winner receives a plurality of the vote, does not receive a majority, we then go on to a runoff election. A runoff occurs if no single candidate receives a majority of the votes, which happens most of the time when we have 4, 5, 6, 7 people running for office. Very rarely do we get somebody who receives a majority of the vote. So we go to this runoff election. The top 2 candidates with the most votes participate. Why are we taking the top 2? Because we know we're going to have a winner. You have to have somebody with a majority. Is it mathematically possible you could end up with a tie? It's possible, but not probable. This runoff election takes place the second Tuesday in April. So we're asking a person to vote in the primary on Super Tuesday, the first Tuesday in March. If we don't get a winner, we're asking him to vote again. Him or her, we're asking them to vote again for the same position, and maybe for a person they didn't vote for in the first place. But we're asking for them to vote again 5 weeks later in April. The primary election, this is won by a simple majority. We're going to have a winner. While we're talking about types of primaries, there is two types of primaries. The first type is a closed primary. And a closed primary is simply to vote in that party's primary, you have to be a registered member of that party. So if you're in a state with a closed primary, if you want to vote in the Republican primary, you have to be a registered Republican. If you want to vote in the Democratic primary, you have to be registered in the Democratic Party, with the Democratic Party. So this means that as a Republican, you cannot go vote in the Democratic primary. As a Democrat, you can't go vote in the Republican primary. But let me ask you this. What does this do to independents, to true independents who don't have a party allegiance, who don't register with the party? Well, these closed primaries actually prevent the independents from voting in a primary. They are not allowed to vote because they are not willing to register with one party or the other. If one type of primary is closed, what do you think the other type of primary is? Yeah, it's that simple. It's open. Open primary means that you don't have to be a registered member. You decide that day which primary you want to go vote in. Texas is technically a closed primary. You don't have to be a registered member, but what we mean by closed is you cannot vote in more than one primary on election day. So when you make your decision, that's the party you're going with. You cannot go vote in both the Republican and the Democratic primary. You can go vote in either one you want. You don't have to be registered, but you have to pick one and stick with it. If our primary ends in a runoff, we cannot switch parties. So if we voted Republican in the primary and the candidate wins, but the Democrats go into a runoff, the only people allowed to vote in the Democratic runoff election is those who voted in the primary, the Democrats. If you voted in the Republican primary, you cannot go vote in the in the Democratic runoff. Now we do see something occur that's called crossover voting. Crossover voting is when it's going to occur in open primaries. We're going to have a member of one party go vote in the primary of the opposite party. We saw that this was encouraged at the national level in 2008. This was encouraged by Rush Limbaugh. We've seen a few Democratic talking heads, a few Democratic media encourage this. What happens is, if you're a Democrat, you will go vote in the Republican primary. If you're a Republican, you're going to go vote in the Democratic primary. What you're attempting to do, are you going to vote for the best candidate or the worst candidate? You're going to vote for the worst, the weakest. You're a Republican, you're going to go vote for the weakest Democrat out there because you're trying to aid your candidate. If enough people get together and they nominate the weakest Democratic candidate, or vice versa, the weakest Republican candidate, it makes the job, or it makes the election of your party much, much easier. So that's crossover voting. Is when you're a Republican, but you go vote Democrat, or you're a Democrat and you go vote Republican. General elections. These are our big elections. These are the ones that matter. These general elections are administered by state and county government, so they take care of this. This is no longer a party. It is won by a plurality vote. If we're talking the state level, remember our state officers are elected by a plurality. They don't have to have a majority. The general election is held on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November of even numbered years. Remember, we were an agrarian society. We were farmers. We were trying to get the crops in. So November, the beginning of the November was the end of the year. So crops had to be in, so we didn't vote till after this. But what I want you to pay attention to, when we're having these general elections, well, let me go ahead and say this too. This is just a reminder. Midterm elections are going to be held in non-presidential election years. And this is when we are electing who? We are electing our state officials. But what I want you to look at is how long is the voting process? We talked about some of the reasons people don't vote, the low voter turnout. We want you to vote once in early March, the first Tuesday in March. We're probably going to ask you to vote again the second Tuesday in April, and then we're going to ask you to cast your final vote. If your candidate's made it, we're going to ask you to vote a third time in November, the second Tuesday after the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So what we're doing is we are asking you to vote 3 times in a period of 8 months, a maximum of 3 times in a period of 8 months for the same position, for the same elected official. To a lot of people, this seems like a waste of time. Why are we doing this? This is too much. We have another type of election in Texas called a special election. Special elections, well, these are designed to meet special or emergency needs. It might be we have somebody in office who passes away. We need the seat filled. So the governor's going to call a special election. It's nonpartisan. That means there's no R, there's no D. They don't run as Republican. They don't run as a Democrat. They just run. There's no primary. All the names are on one ballot. People go vote. Very simple. Then we get not so simple again because we're Texas. To win the special election, winners must receive a majority, 50% plus 1 vote. But what do we know about this? If there's a number of people, remember, if there's 5 or 6 people running in a partisan primary election where we know there's Republicans, we know there's Democrats, how many do you think are going to run an election where there's no party affiliation? We could have 12, 15, 20 people on the same ballot for the same position. What are the chances that we're going to get a majority winner? Very, very slim. So we will go and have a runoff election for the special election. It's easy to vote in Texas, but sometimes the process is extremely long. The conduct and administration of elections. Please remember that the Secretary of State is the Chief Elections Officer. That is their job. They're going to certify all the results. The Board of Elections, they arrange polling places. They print the ballots. They decide where they're going to be printed at or where the polling places, where the voting is going to occur. If they print newspaper ballots, they're going to print the ballots. This is important because this is going to list the number or the order of the names on the ballot. We have a number of people that go vote, and if they don't recognize the names, they didn't do any research, they're just going to vote for the top name on the list. County Commissioners Court will draw the districts. They'll appoint election judges and voting devices. I told you there's two types of ballots. I showed you the party column ballot a few slides back. The second type of ballot is called office block. And what occurs here is we will have the position. This is going to be in the general election. We will have the position, and it's going to have all possible nominees and their party affiliations. So it would be, for President of the United States, we'd have Joe Blow, Republican, John Doe, Democrat, Jane Doe, Libertarian. The position is listed under one block, one office, and it tells us the party affiliation. What we have seen in the past is something called straight ticket voting. And when you go in to vote, whether it's with the paper or whether it's an electronic ballot, as you start off voting, there's this little, on the paper you can mark the box, or the electronic ballot you can mark the box. And what this does is it said, I want to vote for every Republican running for office. I want to vote for every Democrat running for office. Once again, this is going to be the November election. So you press this button and you vote for every Democrat running for office. You don't have to look at their names. You don't have to look at their races. You don't have to look at what position. By races, I mean what office they're running for. You don't have to see what positions they want to get elected for, anything like that. If they're a Democrat, they have your vote. If you hit Republican, if they're a Republican, they have your vote. It saves a lot of time if this is strictly what you want to do. If you want to vote by party, you want to vote straight ticket. We find that these electronic voting machines tend to combine the best of both worlds. The candidates are listed under the office, so we can see what the position is. Once again, President of the United States. It'll list all the candidates and their parties. And we also have the option for straight ticket voting. Even on the electric machine, we move our little cursor over to the box, hit straight ticket voting, and that fills in most of the positions for us. While we're talking about parties and elections, let's go back real quick. Who gets elected? Traditionally, in these statewide elections, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, those things, candidates who win are typically white, Protestant, males. Well, they're WASP, they're white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males. We've gone over this. Y'all know this. You recall we've only had 2 female governors. Who were these 2 female governors? We see very few women and minorities elected to statewide offices. If you think about it, do we have any now? Last thing I want to talk about is the general election campaign. So this is going to be after the primary, after we know who's running for office. They are after your vote for November. In the general election campaign, party identification matters. Remember I told you we had those people that didn't care who the individual was. They were going to vote for the party. In Texas, Republicans are more likely to win. We have voters. They don't care who the Republican candidate is, as long as that candidate is a Republican. That's who they're going to vote for. Incumbency matters. If you're an incumbent, you have name recognition. People think, oh, they've been there. We've elected them before. They must be doing a good job. We're not going to check and see, but since they're already in office, they must be doing a good job. So let's vote for them again. So the incumbent has the advantage of name recognition, but they also have the advantage in fundraising. They have already worked with business. They have already worked with interest groups. These groups, these businesses, these people, they have a working relationship. It would behoove them, it would help them to keep the incumbent in office to continue the working relationship. So this is going to allow an incumbent to raise more money than a challenger usually will. Mobilization of groups, this is going to be special interest. If you are opposed, you're going to see a number of groups oppose you. They're going to tell their members, don't support this person. They won't support what we want. The other hand, these groups, they will support the incumbent. Yes, he has helped pass legislation to help us meet our goals. We need to support him. Choosing issues. Choosing issues is hard in a general election campaign. You really don't want to harp on, you don't want to get on one of the more controversial issues. Why is that? You want to get elected, you need the majority of the vote. A number of these social issues, abortion, immigration, homosexuality, same-sex rights, these are very controversial issues that America and Texans really have no clear view or opinion on. So you want to stay away from these issues so that if you pick an issue to campaign on, I am solidly against abortion. If that is your campaign slogan, I am solidly against abortion. Well, if 47% of Texans think abortion is okay, 47% of Texans aren't going to vote for you. Well, that's great. Well, that still leaves you 53%, and you win. Well, that's true, but that doesn't mean you're going to win, because there are other issues out there. All you have to do is make 6% of the remaining people mad, or 4% of the remaining people mad, and you're at under 50%. So usually we see our candidates, they will take middle of the road sides. They don't want to pick a very divisive issue if they can afford it. They want to get elected. They want to avoid those kinds of things.